Welcome back to our discussion on the research methods. We are now on the second half of peeling off the layers of the research onion. And now we're going to talk about data collection. Okay, so what we need to recall or what we need to know at this point is, have we chosen a quanti approach or a qualitative approach? If you are using a quantitative approach, then you need the following details. Number one, how do you intend to measure the variables? And this is where your operational definitions would come in handy. What is the sampling method that you have used? Are you using probabilistic or non-probabilistic? And what are the inclusion or exclusion criteria? When you, for example, say that your respondents are, say, for example, auditors, what are the inclusion criteria? Okay, then maybe you will define that only auditors who have 3 years of experience in an actual audit team, they must be currently employed, for example, in an audit firm, etc., etc. So you will have to mention in the method section what are your inclusion criteria. The members of the panel will normally ask for that. What are the tools or procedures or materials that you would use to gather the data? Are you going to use a survey questionnaire? Will there be a guided interview? Okay, are you using secondary data, for example? So what are the tools, procedures, and materials used to gather the data? In case you're using a qualitative approach, then you will have to include in your write-up what are the criteria used to select the participants or sources. So similar to the inclusion criteria. Okay, so how would we be able to identify that that participant qualifies to be a participant of your research paper? And then describe the context in which the research was conducted. Okay. Also, describe the role of the researcher. Are you a participant or are you simply a passive observer? So these things we will also talk about in more detail. And as a guide, when you write the method section, describe enough detail for it to be capable of being replicated, so that those who will be sitting as members of the panel for your research paper could ideally be able to visualize what it is that you plan to do. So describe it in enough detail for it to be capable of being replicated. Now, here are the most common data collection methods. And of course, the most common of them all is a survey. Okay, now when you conduct a survey, you have to be able to tell the readers of your paper, where do you plan to conduct the survey, when, and how. Is it going to be online? Are you going to hand out printed copies of the survey questionnaire? How are you going to get back the results? Okay, are they going to mail it to you? Are they going to email it to you? Are you going to wait for them to finish answering it? Okay, you also have to tell us whether, or to tell the readers of your paper, whether the survey is researcher made or is it adapted. Okay, now if it is researcher made, then make sure that you go through the rigors of testing for the validity of this researcher made survey instrument. So if it is researcher made, it has to undergo phase validity, whereby you will ask experts in the field to rate your questionnaire to determine if it is phase valid. And then you will also have to perform pilot testing, okay, to test for internal consistency of the questions that you are asking. Now, in case that it is adapted, make sure to check for the licensing requirements of these adapted questionnaires. Are they free for use in terms of academic purposes, or do you need to purchase a license? Okay, have you been granted permission by the authors of the said questionnaire? So these are things that you have to consider when using an adapted questionnaire. What is the design of the questionnaire? Meaning, how many parts are there? What are the parts about? How many items? How will it be answered? So say, for example, the researchers are utilizing a researcher-made questionnaire made up of 4 parts. Part A includes questions regarding demographic factors, including but not limited to age, gender, etc., etc. Part B would ask Part B would be an evaluation of the level of satisfaction and is comprised of a 30-item questionnaire that can be answered in a Likert type scale on a scale of 1 to 5, for example. Okay, so discuss what is the design of the questionnaire and what is your sample size. You may also use existing data, okay, or you may use secondary data. Say, for example, you will be downloading from reputable sites copies of the published financial statements or maybe sustainability reports. and you would like to analyze those. So in case of secondary data or existing data, you have to mention in your write-up where were the materials sourced, meaning where can we find the materials, where have you downloaded the materials from, how was the data originally produced. Okay, is it coming from the companies themselves? Is it coming from a regulatory agency, etc.? What criteria did you use to select the material? Say, for example, the data range or the choice of companies. Are you narrowing it down to listed companies only? And if yes, are you narrowing it down further into certain industry types? And when were the materials retrieved? So it is important for you to indicate when the materials were retrieved so that in case there are changes to the repository, then we would be able to trace back what particular date, okay, that the materials were retrieved so that we would know which version of the data you used in case that there are changes. Okay, other common data collection methods, and I've seen this in most of your pitches, use of interviews or FGDs, like how did you find and select the participants? How many participants will there be? What is the form of the interview? Is it structured? Is it semi-structured? Or is it unstructured? The most flexible of them all. How long were the interviews and how were they recorded? Okay, so these are in terms of interviews. Another would be in terms of qualitative, but you are still using secondary data. For example, you are using court cases, okay? You are using abstracts of provisions of the law, for example. So what types of materials did you analyze? How and why were they selected and collected? So these things must be included as part of your method section. So for example, if you're using a quantitative approach, so you might say the survey consisted of 5 multiple choice questions and 10 questions that were measured on a 7-point Likert scale. The aim was to conduct the survey with 350 student customers of Academy Y on the school premises in its main campus in Tagbilaran City, Bohol from October 18 to 21, 2021 between 11 and 1500 hours. A student customer was defined as a person who had processed a monetary transaction with Academy Y on the day of questioning. So notice the inclusion criteria. Participants were given 5 minutes to fill in the survey anonymously, and 408 responded. Because not all surveys were fully completed, 371 survey results were included in the analysis. This is assuming that the survey has already been completed. Of course, if you're still in the proposal stage, then you wouldn't have yet any information about how many actually responded and the like. But basically, this is how you're going to describe the instrument that you're going to use, how many parts were there, okay, when are you going to administer it, where are you going to administer it. So this is an example of a quantitative approach, or a study using quantitative approach. All right, so there are two types of hypotheses because we are talking about the quantitative approach. If you are doing a relationship testing, you would normally encounter two types of hypotheses. So there is, or a quantitative approach. You normally encounter two types of hypotheses, either the null hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis. So I know that you already have an idea about this, but the null hypothesis predicts that there will not be a significant difference or relationship. So the hypothesis of the null is there is none. There is no significant relationship. There is no significant difference. The alternative hypothesis, on the other hand, predicts that there may be a significant difference or a relationship. So they're kind of like on opposing ends. Okay, the null hypothesis would say there's no relationship. The alternative hypothesis would say there is a relationship. Okay, for example, customer service training of IT telephone support staff will not lead to a significant improvement in user satisfaction feedback. That's null. But if you go to make an alternative hypothesis for that, then the alternative would sound something like customer services training of IT telephone support staff will lead to a significant improvement in user satisfaction feedback. Okay, so that's the null, and then that's the alternative. Now, it is the null hypothesis that is tested statistically. So remember when we said that theories must be falsifiable, and when we do research, it must be with an intention to prove the theory wrong. This is to anchor ourselves to be more objective. And then to confirm that, it will now be the null that we will test statistically. Okay, so again, remember, null hypothesis means there is no significant relationship or no difference at all. And this is normally where you will get to see the importance of the p-value Okay, so whether to accept or to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, and don't worry because we will be having hopefully data analysts who will be working with you on this one. Okay, so if the p-value is greater than 0.05, then we accept the null hypothesis, meaning to say there is no significant relationship. We reject the alternative. But if the p-value is less than or equal to 0.05, then we reject the null hypothesis and we accept the alternative hypothesis, meaning to say that there is a significant difference or that there is a significant relationship. Okay, but the 0.05 is a rule of thumb. If you wish to be stricter, you may use a p-value lesser than 0.05 if you really wish to be so strict no, in your research findings. But generally, we do use the p-value of 0.05 as a reference point. Okay, remember it is the null hypothesis that will be tested statistically. Now let's talk about the survey strategy. A survey strategy is usually associated with the deductive approach and tends to be used for both exploratory and descriptive research. So here are the more popular collection techniques under the survey strategy, and I think the most popular and the most, I must say, widely used, including as well almost all of your pitches, are using a questionnaire type of survey strategy. That's why we normally ask you for the survey questionnaire. But other than the questionnaire type, there could also be a structured interview, and there could also be a semi-structured structured or a semi-structured interview, and there could also be a structured observation. Okay, all of those will fall under the survey strategy. It's just that the questionnaire is the most popular. Okay. So, have you ever answered a survey questionnaire before? I think at one point in your lives you must have, right? No matter how simple. So, data shows that the longer a survey is, the less time respondents spend answering each question. And I think you will agree with me on this. Now, there will be respondent fatigue if the questionnaire is too lengthy. So, the rule of thumb is that there should be no less than 7, but no more than 35 items, and it should be answerable in no more than 20 minutes. But like what we said, this is just the rule of thumb. This is what we endeavor to, to have. This is the ideal. But most often than not, we do get to see researchers that can't follow this rule of thumb. And sometimes we do understand because the concepts may be more complex than we would want them to be. Okay, so, but the rule of thumb is this one. Now, be careful when you when you have your survey questionnaire, be careful with reverse coded or reverse scored items. Because sometimes there are instruments, especially if you have adapted these instruments, where there will be reverse coded items just to make sure of the consistency of the answers. For example, there might be a statement there, for example, I love dogs. And then on the statements after it, maybe about 10 questions after, for example, then you'll find another statement, I don't hate dogs. So they are asked differently, but then they are trying to test your consistency. And sometimes these consistency checks may come in the form of reverse coded or reverse scored items. So it's very important if you're adapting a questionnaire that you also ask from the author how the items will be scored. Okay, then test for face validity, most especially if this is a researcher-made questionnaire. So have the experts evaluate the acceptability of this questionnaire, and then perform pilot testing to test for internal consistency or reliability. So hopefully we'll be having another discussion on how to determine internal consistency or reliability, and or maybe your data analysts can help you with this as well. So let's now take a look at some of the common survey question mistakes, especially if you are making your own. So if you're coming up with a researcher-made questionnaire, please be cautious of the following common survey question mistakes. For example, and we categorize them into 4. There could be double-barreled questions, leading questions, loaded questions, and absolutes. So let's try to illustrate what these are. So when you talk about double-barreled questions, as an illustration, for example, you get to see this one. How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the pay and work benefits of your current job? So if you get to answer this one, what if I am not satisfied with the pay, but I am satisfied with the work benefits? Okay, these are double-barreled questions. It's possible that you feel differently, or the respondent might feel differently about the pay and the work benefits, and then you are forcing them to just come up with one answer. You're forcing them to come up with just one satisfaction level. No? So this is a common survey question mistake. Or another, how efficient and effective do you find the enrollment process of the University of Earth main campus? What if you find it efficient but not effective? Like you get to finish the enrollment process very quickly, but then there are a lot of mistakes and then you have to eventually need to have it corrected. So what if you feel differently about efficiency versus that of effectiveness? And then again, you're forcing the respondent to just give one answer, right? Or how satisfied are you with the services provided by our teachers and office personnel? What if you're satisfied with the teachers but not with the office personnel? Okay, so these are examples of double-barreled questions. Another common survey question mistake is that of leading questions. Take a look at this one. How incompetent is politician X when it comes to foreign policy? You are already planting in the minds of whoever will answer that politician X is incompetent. So this is already tainted with your own bias. So this is an example of a leading question. Or should concerned parents use infant car seats? If I answer no, then that means I am not a concerned parent, right? So it's kind of like you're already putting judgment in these questions. So these are examples of leading questions. Perhaps to correct this one, maybe instead of asking how incompetent is politician X, maybe you can ask, please describe your politician's position on foreign policy. And then let them tell you what they think about that foreign policy. Or maybe you can ask, do you think special car seats should be required for infant passengers? So there is no judgment, right, in these two questions. So when we rephrase the questions, it sounds more accepting. Okay, so be careful with leading questions. There will always be, there might be biases that would seep into the way you ask the questions. Another might be loaded questions like, where do you like to party? You are already assuming that the respondent likes to party. What if I don't like to party? Or where do you enjoy drinking beer? What if I don't enjoy drinking beer? What if I don't drink beer at all? So these are loaded questions. So to correct this one, maybe you would like to ask, what do you like to do on weekend evenings? And then maybe you'll get to see answers like going to parties, or maybe reading a book, or maybe enjoying a movie. So it's not a loaded question anymore. Or instead of saying, where do you enjoy drinking beer? Maybe you can ask a preliminary question on whether they drink beer. And then if they drink beer, then you can ask where they enjoy drinking it. But if they don't drink beer, then it will be the end of the survey questionnaire. Okay, so these are examples of loaded questions and how you can correct them. Another is absolutes. For example, do you always eat breakfast? So if I answer yes, that means I always eat breakfast. But if I answer no, that means I never eat breakfast. What if I only eat breakfast twice a week? Where will I place myself, right? So absolutes. So in order to correct this one, maybe you'd like to ask, how many days a week do you usually eat breakfast? Okay, then I will have, then I will be able to get a better answer, a better reflection of how frequently people eat breakfast. So those are the common survey mistakes. So let's apply. Okay, double-barreled, leading, loaded, and absolutes. So in case of double-barreled questions, for example, in your opinion, how would you rate the speed and accuracy of your work? So perhaps, because this is a double-barreled question, you may ask a different question asking them to evaluate the speed, and then maybe a different question asking them to evaluate the accuracy of their work. How about this one? Most Americans prefer to purchase products manufactured in the United States. Do you prefer to purchase products manufactured in the United States? So it's kind of like a leading question, right? You're already telling them, most Americans, they prefer the US products. What about you? Do you prefer the US products? So it's a leading question. Another, how much do you approve of the president's oppressive immigration policy? So you're already putting in your bias. So you're already judging the immigration policy to be oppressive. So meaning to say, this is another leading question. What is your current age? So notice 10 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40. What if I am over 40 years old? Where will I answer? Right? So it does not include all possible choices and might leave others, like maybe if I'm already 42, so should I just answer 31 to 40? Or this one, what is your current age? Less than 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, over 30. So at least we would know I could answer over 30. But what if I am 20 years old? Where will I answer? The 10 to 20 or the 20 to 30? because 20 appears in both, right? So this is also a common mistake we get to see in survey questionnaires. So be careful about this one. Okay. Now, other than the common data collection techniques, let's talk about the time horizon of your study. Your study may either be cross-sectional or it may be longitudinal. So when we say cross-sectional, it only studies a snapshot. Okay, only a particular date, only a particular period. So for example, if you are saying you would like to study the level of student engagement and your respondents are all students enrolled in the second semester of school year 2023-2024. So that's only for that period of time. But longitudinal would be studying changes and developments of a phenomenon over time. So say, for example, you are following the progress of a particular batch of students from first year all the way to when they are already employed. So that's longitudinal, studies the change and development of a phenomenon over time. So also include in your methods write-up if you're using cross-sectional, if you're having cross-sectional or longitudinal studies. All right? Now let's talk about the method of analysis. And actually the method of analysis would depend on whether you're having quantitative or qualitative. So for quantitative, mention how the data was prepared before the analysis. For example, how did you deal with missing data or outliers? What statistical software is used? Are you using SPSS? Are you using Minitab? If you're using statistical software that requires licenses, make sure that you have the license. Okay, but there are already a lot of open source statistical softwares out there, like JASP, for example, Jamovi, for example. So also mention if those are the statistical software that you would be using. What statistical tests will you use? Are you using two-tailed, t-test, simple linear regression? Are you using fuzzy DiMattei? Are you using structural equation modeling, ARIMA, and all of these things? So mention it there. For the qualitative, are you using content analysis, thematic analysis, discourse analysis, narrative analysis? So basically, you tell us what is your method of analysis. Example of how your write-up would sound like. So for the quantitative, before analysis, the gathered data were prepared. The data set was checked for missing data and outliers. For this, the outlier labeling rule was used. All values outside the calculated range were considered outliers. The data was then analyzed using statistical software, SPSS. Okay? If it's qualitative, it might sound something like this. The interviews were transcribed and thematic analysis was conducted. This involved coding all the data before identifying and reviewing 6 key themes. Each theme was examined to gain an understanding of the participants' perceptions and motivations. So this is an example of how your methods write-up would look like, okay, in terms of discussing your data analysis. And remember the fourth part, we have to justify our choices. So if you did not take the standard route, discuss why the other methods are not suitable, justify how your approach will bring about new knowledge, and acknowledge limitations or weaknesses, but please make sure that you justify how these are outweighed by the strengths. So normally, one common mistake we see is that students will include a limitations section, no? Limitations of the study section. It's like, it is usually the place where they confess all of their shortcomings, okay? But the limitation section is not intended to be a confession box of all the weaknesses of your paper. It's intended for you to tell us that yes, there are limitations, and then to tell us how you address the limitations. The limitation section should be able to show the readers that while there are limitations, you're able to overcome the limitations, and so therefore your study is still valid. Okay, there's still reason for us to read your study. All right, so now it really is your turn. We have completed the discussion on research conceptual framework and then research methods. This is now the second part. So you now have to write the method section. Remember that for the method section, you're supposed to include in your write-up your methodological approach, your data collection, and then your analysis, your data analysis, and the justification of your methodological choice. Okay, so make sure that those four are clearly outlined in your methods section. So it's now really your turn to write the method section using the same page layout instructions as we had for the introduction. Write the conceptual framework and the method section of your research. Now, I know that there are differences in terms, for example, of the methods that you're using, whether quanti or quali, and even if you're all using quanti, there will still be a difference in terms of the number of variables that you are using, okay, the complexity of the framework that you have chosen. And so therefore, I will not be indicating a page limit. However, please observe conciseness of thoughts, okay? Observe the rule on parsimony. Ideally, but not required, but this will be the ideal, there shall be a maximum of 2 pages for the conceptual framework and maybe about 2 pages as well for the methods. Now, we will be allowing for revisions to the working title and maybe slight revisions to the introduction as a result of the conceptual framework. So perhaps when you have finally identified the framework you're using, then you get to tweak some parts of the intro, which will eventually also change some parts of the title, and that is completely allowed and expected. Okay, so we expect that to happen already. So good luck on writing the conceptual framework and the method section. Okay, so hopefully you can get some answers to whatever has been bugging you in terms of writing these. But in case these videos would still require some further clarification, please do not hesitate to message me to ask these questions. So special thanks, of course, to the template that we are using, and as well as the references that we have used all throughout the discussion of the conceptual framework and the research methods. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me in our online inputs for the conceptual framework and the research methods. And as always, happy researching.